Evening all on Play Chess and YouTube, streaming to YouTube as well. Okay, I thought this week we can have a look at the recent FIDE Women's Grand Prix tournament, and Yifan Hou played amazing chess in it. Let's look at some of her games from the Women's Grand Prix. Khanty-Mansiysk. So c4 in this game, I'd like to show you against Tatiana Kosintseva. So knight f6, Yifan played now knight f3, so a quiet English opening to start off with. Hope the board's okay and everything. We'll continue. So e6 and now g3, so Catalan territory potentially. d5, bishop g2, and now Tatiana, she took on c4. Might potentially gets a small edge from this opening. Queen a4 check, and now just taking the pawn. Black played a6, maybe with an idea of trying to do something like this to oppose the diagonal with tempo of b5. Queen drops back, and we see c5, d3, and it looks like a kind of dragon formation in reverse. Like this, looks like a Sicilian dragon in reverse a little bit. So a comfortable position for white. Bishop e7, knight c3. After castles, now white plays a4, trying to discourage b5, of course. Bit of a bind on the queen side. Knight b6. And after castles, we see knight bd5. So, okay, has white got anything here? Well, this bishop's a problem piece. That's one issue. We see now knight e5, which puts more pressure on the diagonal. Clearly there's a focal point on d5 here. And black plays now queen c7, hitting the knight on e5, and now we see knight c4. I'll just put on a Kbitzer actually as well at this moment. Nothing much is happening here, I believe, at the moment, although white's threatening frees the queen side with a5. Nice grip on the b6 square. Bishop d7 doesn't do much about that, but also there's an interesting thing here though. Instead of a5, there's an interesting little tactic available to white, which is played a forcing move sequence quite early on here, which the engines actually seems to quite like, and the forcing move sequence is knight takes d5. After knight takes, can you guess? Well, actually, there's not too many of you watching at this moment. Maybe later we'll play some guess the move quizzes. White now plays the forcing move, which maybe some of us wouldn't consider, to give up the bishop for the knight. But this forcing move is played. The idea that after e takes, knight b6 is a double attack, which is annoying for black. And now, okay, black doesn't want to lose the exchange. Also to note, c4 doesn't really interrupt this. White can actually play knight takes a8, hitting the queen here. So that's a nice advantage for white. So this looks like a horrible fork for the moment. Rook a e8 is played. White simply could have just played knight takes d5 here. That seems possible. This diagonal, although it looks risky, I'm not sure that black can actually do anything with it. Say queen c6, e4, bishop e6. White would still stand, I think, better here. So this looks nice, but instead we see bishop f4. This is another good move instead of taking on d5 immediately. So bishop f4, asking the queen to move, queen c6, and now, interestingly, after queen c6, even stronger technically than knight takes d5 now, it's actually another move, queen takes d5, so hitting now the queen, and d7. So white's a pawn up and getting rid of, importantly, the potentially dangerous light square bishop, which could have been a real menace on this diagonal and around these light squares. So white seems to be a solid pawn up. You might think, well, what about b2? That's not really a problem here. Rook ab1. If here's say, then rook takes b7, and this is very pleasant. The queen's actually holding a4 here, so that's very pleasant for white. So in this position, black actually played bishop f6. So Yifan Hou's achieved a comfortable position, but okay, black's got activity. There's a rook blasting down, there's a queen blasting down, the bishop looks nice on diagonal for the moment. But here another forcing move is played, bishop d6. So unless black doesn't react with something like rook d8, black is going to lose that exchange. So black played rook d8, and this is very technically a brilliant exercise. Bishop c7 now, hitting the queen and the rook. So getting the queens off basically. Black doesn't want to lose the exchange. So rook takes d7, bishop takes b6. You might wonder, well, the pawn, the thing is c5 is attacked. So black actually, instead of taking on b2, in this case, apparently, well, either taking here is possible or just rook a2, that's possible. And once the bishop moves, in this position, white can just gang up on c5. I mean, taking on c5 is also, of course, good as well. So white's going to be a pawn up, whatever happens, it seems. Black played rook e8 instead of bishop takes b2. And then we see rook fe1, bishop takes b2, rook ab1. So c5 is at the end of this, or is it? Bishop a3 is now possible. You might think, well, hang on a sec. Isn't rook a2 technically a little bit stronger? Perhaps. The engine does suggest bishop rook a2, which does deny bishop a3. But what about bishop c3? Here there's rook c1. And the rook's also holding e2. Bishop b4, and then we can actually just take on c5. This is okay. So that was possible as well, but this is also good for white. Black tries to cling on for the moment, but rook b3, bishop b4, and now ganging up on c5 like this. This pawn is immune. I think there's a little tactic on the back row. If rook takes e2, rook takes b4, little back row tactic. So for the moment, c5 is actually under scrutiny without e2 being an issue here. Black plays h6, gives the king some air, in particular h7 from the back row mate. And now e4 protecting e2, so renewing the threat basically on c5. And it's difficult to see how black can actually protect the c5 pawn without doing some weird contortion here. If rook e5, say, f4, and this is just no good. This would be totally a misplaced rook with g4 to come on f5 and then taking on c5. So black is definitely going to be losing a pawn here now. The c5 pawn under too much scrutiny without any real defense. Black tries a5, and now this is taken. And there's another cute tactical point here, that this pin can easily be parried with bishop e3, protecting c1. So white has emerged here, a pawn up. Is this enough to win? It's a good advantage, it's a healthy advantage, clear advantage. Rook dc7 is played, and white takes a pair of rooks off. And now we see d4, so we've got this very powerful, potentially, d pawn, this passed d pawn. Black's got a little bit of activity to deal with, and it might be seem quite frightening. There's an expression, you know, it's always hard to win a one game. A good friend of mine, Nxd5 actually had a very tough game over the weekend. He had a winning position, 2 pawns up, but the opponent swindled. So you got to like keep track of counterplay. But the counterplay here, there's only 2 pieces for black. Okay, the rook's kind of hemmed in at the moment, but the pawn can actually be pushed here. Although there's a blockade, I'll try and lift this blockade soon. King f8, rook b1, trying to get behind the pawn seems entirely logical. Or even just rook c1, just to get rid of this rook. Pawn on the light square away from the bishop means, you know, this ending with the pawns all on light squares here, this is going to be a good bishop ending as well. Rook a2, okay, going for the a2 pawn, but conceding the whole c file. So a positional sacrifice from white in effect. For what? So equal on material, but are these pawns dangerous? e5, yes they are. d6 to come. White now has the 7th rank here a rook on the 7th is very good statistically. If you read My System by Nimzo, he was a great fan of a rook on the 7th. It inhibits the opponent's king from coming out. Statistically, there are often pawns lurking around. So two advantages: to restrict the king, you can improve your king, and the rooks are more active. Rook a3. Technically here though, instead of rook c7, a more accurate move is played in this particular position. Rook c8 check, believe it or not. And now rook c7 checked, kicking the king back here. So that little finesse now, rook takes b7, a pawn up immediately. Again, so pawn up with this commanding d pawn, rook d3 trying to get behind the pawn, and now another little check, and now the pawn moves forward, so gaining a bit of time before the move 40 time control, and move 41 with an extra hour on the clock. f6 was played, trying to undermine these two pawns. Now we see rook takes g7, f takes, rook e7, king f8, and now it doesn't matter about the d pawn. In fact, white's collecting all these pawns. Check, check, king h8, rook a7. Okay, so d6 is dropping, in fact, but now we've got two passed pawns over here. So check, winning the e5 pawn, making it 3 passed pawns basically. So it's just black's a5 pawn, which is a problem. This is now looking as though it should be a smooth win from here. And black tries for something on f2. It's not really a problem. Bishop b6 protecting f2. Rook a2. h5. Now these pawns are just going to be pushed, with the king also going to be in trouble as well. There's already some mating net potential evident here. Now we see actually g5. So if bishop takes g5, there's rook g7 check, winning the bishop. And here black actually felt this was hopeless now. White's going to play h6, h7 check, and it's hopeless. So black actually resigned here after g5. So a positional win in this round. I think this was round 1, the 9th of April 2014. So if we quickly review the game, an English opening played by Yifan Hou against Tatiana Kosintseva, who was 24-9-6. Yifan Hou was 2-6-1-8 at the start of this game, 2-6-1-8. So interestingly, a little positional combination involving what you wouldn't normally like to lose your light square bishop, but if the square is not totally exploitable, it's worth considering such a move. If it doesn't seem to backfire, then it seems to just technically win a pawn. The queen's coming off, and white was able to again use a pawn set again, just boosting trump card. So here we reached actually equality again, but with white totally in the driving seat, possession of the c file past d pawn, and black trying to get rid of white's center, ended up losing all her pawns here. So yeah, big price to be paid there. Okay, so a nice little positional win, 56 moves. Let's have a look at another game now. And unfortunately, this is, I can't pronounce this name. I could read you the letters or something. I'll have a go. Yifan Hou was playing black against Bxh6 Kg8. I'm sorry, that probably sounds really funny. Bxh6 Kg8. I'm trying to read it as though it was a normal word. So Kg8 is Tuvshintugs. I don't know how you pronounce that. Anyway, pardon me. So d4 knight f6 from Yifan Hou, c4 e6. So we go into a Nimzo-Indian. Bishop g5. The bishop g5 is actually, according to Livebook here, is about the 6th most popular move. Bishop g5. And now we see Yifan Hou playing c5. I think this is the main move actually, c5. No, h6 apparently is even more popular. c5 is quite popular. d5 main move. Now black took immediately on c3. Sometimes also h6 is played, or d6, but black took immediately. This is also quite a popular continuation. So d6 after e3. Now queen e7. Bishop d3 is played. Now knight bd7. Knight f3. h6. Bishop drops back. And now Yifan Hou played knight b6. A little bit more played was e5 in that position, but knight b6 keeps an eye on c4, so the bishop can't drop back or anything. How is c4 going to be put under more pressure later? Well, at the moment this centre seems a bit vulnerable. White actually played this is actually a serious concern. White took on e6. This, funny enough though, taking on e6, although it's suggested by the engine as well, it actually leaves black with a success as far as the opening phase. I'm not sure this is a very good testing continuation, testing position of the Nimzo-Indian. It seems uncomfortable for white. Knight d2, and interestingly, black castled queenside here. So black castled queenside. And it looks as though, okay, the engine didn't even suggest actually castling queenside. Well, not this depth, just castling kingside or rook d8. So castling queenside is interesting. What is black up to? d5 with the rook behind it. That looks nice. And in fact, a4 was played, kind of ignoring d5, and it is viable to liberate. You know, this rook, this d file has got some issues on it. Queen e2 was played, and now black could have actually considered also just taking here, but black played g5 first, and now d takes c4, and it looks as though white's running into trouble. The advantage for black technically has been increasing in the last few moves. Possibly a4 wasn't the right plan, with white still not castled, and white's playing price for this. After knight takes c4, Yifan actually plays knight takes c4, after bishop takes c4, simply takes on c4 again, queen takes c4, and now there's a big problem after knight e4. This actually stops white from castling because of the knight d2 resource, I think. If castles, let's just make sure. Yes, the engine is suggesting knight d2, which looks attractive, but also apparently stronger, even stronger than knight d2. Believe it or not, it's just h5, just threatening to trap the bishop. And if h3, this looks horrible for knight takes g3, but apparently here, you know, just knight d2 or rook d2 is strong. Yeah, h4 can be good as well, putting the bishop here. But anyway, okay. In the game, white actually played h3 here, which looks a little bit as though, well, isn't there this knight takes g3? The thing is, white has, I think, queen g4 check as a resource, so it's not total devastation. White's not forced to play f takes. That would be very tempting then to play knight takes g3. No, white would have queen g4 check here, but queen d7. This would still be better because a queen d2 is on the cards here. So this kind of thing is still better for black, and the game is a little bit similar. So in the game, after h3. When I say a little bit similar, this was actually the game path. Knight takes g3 was played here, queen g4, check. The engine suggests actually f5 instead. F5, and if white castles here, then there's always knight d2. Interesting. So I'm not sure what white actually does here. Queen e2. It looks as though black's got a phenomenal position just with f5. Okay, so knight takes g3 might actually be, well, it's very good as well. For this continuation, queen d7, as we've seen. and now rook ae8, and it looks as though these fragmented pawns don't look too healthy. So queen takes, say, in the game king e2 was played, but if queen takes, rook takes, if king e2 here, then simply this, and what does white do about e3? So what a disaster this position for white. Just at move 21, it looks as though this is a disaster. If castling, I think we can just take the queen off and then take on e3. And also it seems, you know, it's just diabolical, the structure. So okay, after this white played king e2, but there's big problems here. Black now just plays f5, and in fact white resigned here at move 22. White was actually, I think, the lowest rated in the tournament, 2340, and recognises something quite horrible about this position. If queen f3, queen d2 check, and then it looks as though rook e3, maybe queen f5. So f4 is actually technically stronger here. If takes, rook e3 check, and this apparently is about +7 for black. Black is now threatening horrible things like taking here. So this is really horrible. You can imagine all this. It just looks as though it's a disaster. Rook d3, yeah. There's not much defense of white's position here. So actually, yeah, white actually resigned after this f5. Not wanting to play on this position, quite understandably. I think if black plays rook takes e3, this is also good for black anyway. Even the simple, just taking on e3. This position, just queen d6. Yeah, it looks horrible for these weaknesses. Okay, so that was a bit of a crush with the Nimzo-Indian. I think white went wrong early on. I think with a4, if we look at this position, engine suggests this is about equal here, or maybe a tiny bit better for black. Taking, white should have, okay, knight d2, white, queen e2 maybe instead of retreating the knight. So maybe that's just, but here just castling. And if d5, I mean, it looks a little bit on the dangerous side though. Bishop e2, if taking here, queen c2, this might not have been so bad. It's actually still a slight advantage for white there apparently, technically. White has this potentially dangerous bishop along the diagonal, so it's not all bad as in the game we saw. So it's not entirely bad, but this might actually be fun for black though. Even this line, if black gets in this h4, then it's another game. It's another game basically. But the way it was played, it was a disaster for white. So quickly getting punished with the king in the center, unfortunately, stranded in the center, not good. Okay, so let's have a look at another game now. Now, this game is against Nana Desnodz's Zegna. Oh no, I'm gonna have to spell the name. Oh dear, pardon me. Nana, I think I'm right. N-A-N-A D Zag Nidzi. I can't do it. I can't do the pronunciation. I think I've heard her as well. I think she was a commentator recently as well. Very good commentator for a tournament recently. Anyway, so Yifan playing white plays e4, and Nana, just say Nana from now on, played c5, the Sicilian, after knight f3, e6, and we have an open Sicilian. And actually, I think this is one of the more beautiful games when I've looked at these games before. Just a few days ago I saw this game as well. I think it's one of the most artistic games for me. You know, if chess is an art form, this is an artifact of art, this game we're about to see. So a6, c4, Maroczy bind is the setting for it. Knight f6, knight c3, queen c7. So good so far. Bishop e2, b6. So black's got this kind of hedgehog coming up. Castles, bishop b7. So hedgehogs are meant to be squashed. So queen d3, knight c6. Not in real life. I mean, on the chessboard, if the opponent sets up a hedgehog position, please don't, you know, squash your hedgehogs in the garden. You know, they're nice creatures. Okay, so knight c6, knight takes c6, and now white actually took with the d pawn. Fine. Actually, what does the engine suggest here? Whoa, hang on. Knight takes c6, bishop takes c6 was an alternative. Which might be interesting to keep that c file, to keep control of the c file and pressure on c4. So it seems a bit defeatist seeing this, because there's less pressure on c4, although there might be some advantages of that. At the moment, it seems to be an advantage for white, though, I would say, just intuitively, that black's pressure, scrutiny of the c4 is gone. What does black get? Well, maybe the d file later. f4, bishop c5 check, king moves, black castles. So e5 hitting the knight, rook ad8, so that d file, but the queen now switches to quite a brutal square. But if white's got enough control of the position, I don't think white should be embarrassed with such moves. The control of the centre is adequate enough to support an attacking scheme here, a crude one, even on h7. The knight goes to d7. An immediate bishop d3 might not be that good, though. Bishop d3, g6, what is white doing there? White didn't play that immediately. White played actually knight e4. So knight e4 looks at c5, ties down the knight, because otherwise there's double pawns on knight takes. So if the knight moves, then there'll be double pawns, and blocking in the bishop even more. So the bishop actually retreats as though c5 is on the cards, and that looks as though black will be happier with that bishop across that diagonal. But here white goes into a crude mode, bishop d3, looking at h7 now. So there's no immediate threat, because knight f6, there's knight takes. It looks a little bit dangerous, though, got to say. But I don't think that's too much of a problem if black reacts adequately here against that with g6. Okay, so g6. Okay, the knight was otherwise tied down. If knight b8, then knight f6 is winning straight off the bat. Okay, so g6, blunting the bishop. Okay, some dark square weaknesses, and you might think, yeah, this looks like a fairly standard thing that happens in chess. These dark square weaknesses, blunting h7, but b3 now, and this bishop looks to be heading on this diagonal. It looks quite dangerous. c5, and that looks entirely logical. Bishop b2, and it looks as though knight f6 might be supported here. In fact, that is pretty dangerous here. And against this, black snaps off that knight. Bishop takes e4, so white has the bishop pair. But here's the beautiful thing. White actually has a very dangerous subtle threat, which isn't really addressed. If black realised the strength of the threat here, then maybe f5 would have been played. Apparently, I think that's the lesser evil move for black to play, to weaken the structure a bit, play in terms of the structure a little bit, just to blunt white's attack. Apparently best for white would be bishop f3, and that's an advantage to white. E takes isn't entirely that clear after losing the e6 pawn, that white has such an easy time of it. It's only like a 0.57 advantage to white here. Check here using the pin. This isn't such a big deal, apparently. Everything's holding each other here. So that was probably the way to go, but black didn't realise the strength of something coming up and played actually b5. This next move really blows the black position away. I wonder if you can guess what white plays in this position. If I give you 20 seconds starting from now. So, sorry, white's play. What do you think white played in this position? So if anyone's awake, can you suggest a move for white here? When I'll let you catch up to the position. There's a bit of a delay. Okay, okay, I hope you've caught up to the position now everywhere, and black's king safety is in question here. So what would you play as white? So black had to stop knight f6 earlier, but the light square bishop is still pretty painful. It looks as though this structure is totally designed against it. But white now plays f5 anyway. And if this is not taken, then in fact things could get horrific if it's not taken. There's also knight takes e5 to consider. If knight takes e5, then f6, bishop moves, queen h6, and that's going to be the end of the game on g7. So f6 is very serious. E takes, and now can you see the point of this f5? So what is the point here? What does white play in this position? Okay, now if you say bishop takes it, apparently this is not entirely good, because black doesn't have to do this. That would be horrible for black with check, e6, queen takes c7, winning the queen. No, but black actually can ignore bishop takes f5 with knight takes e5. Apparently this is okay. This is equal to nothing going on there. So white actually plays the much stronger move, rook takes f5, rook sack. So h7 is a victim again, and white actually threatens now rook h5, really trying to get rid of this pawn chain. So rook h5 is actually on the cards. If we demonstrate that, rook e8, which wasn't played, well here even stronger than rook h5 is rook takes f7, taking. So mate in 3, bishop d5, queen f7. That's horrible things can happen on rook e8. Forget rook e8. Let's say this other one. Then rook h5, and then what does black do about this? If taking here, then say f5, e takes, knight takes. White has in this position a crushing idea, bishop takes. If knight takes here, that's mate. If king g7, queen g6, king h8, queen h6, and this knight pinned, this is horrible. White's threatening a mate in 3 like this. If bishop d8, check as an example, bishop d5. It's gruesome. It gets pretty gruesome. This position quite quickly. So rook h5 is the major tactical threat here. Queen b6 was played. And actually now, is rook h5 working here? There's a better move than rook h5. If rook h5 in this position, then after taking f5 works better for black, much better than before. So actually Yifan adapts to this defensive resource very well. Plays one of the strongest moves apparently in the position. Can you see what white played in this position now? So white's play here after Queen B6. I wonder if you're catching up to that position. Okay, you've got the position with Queen B6. So if I give you 20 seconds here, what would you play with white here in this position? It's very. The engines really love this move that Yifan played. It's quite simple and strong, actually. That's the clue. Anyone? I think I'm going to show you now. I suppose you're on the verge of. Coming up with something. I'm going to show you. Queen H6, it actually pins against that last move. Or does it? Not really. No, actually there's a really clever point. It's not even about this pin. The knight's protecting the queen. What I think it's about is something else I've just noticed. Well, in the game continuation this is taken anyway. The rook is taken anyway. Okay, what is white actually threatening? White is threatening now rook h5, because then we'd have pressure on h7. So if takes, we just take on h7. So rook h5 is on the cards. So g takes was taken, and now we see e6 threatening queen g7. Now at the moment the knight's protecting the queen, but here black is forced to do something quite radical. If f6, this is a mate in 7, bishop takes, and what does black do about h7? This is not lasting too long. The king defends here, looking at h6. So this is going to be a forced mate here. So basically, black is forced to use that knight now. Pretty soon. Black has to use the knight, so the queen becomes loose on b6. And now Yifan plays queen g5 check, and this is just winning. It's actually a forced mate in 4, believe it or not. I thought it was actually about winning the queen, but now it's actually a forced mate in 4. Black resigned here. If king h8, then the forced mate in 4, bishop takes, and I actually thought it was a different variation here, which is okay. When I was looking at this game without an engine, I thought the idea here is just to win the queen. With check, I think this might be winning as well. Just taking here might be winning. Well, you know, it's plus 15. This just wins taking the queen. But even more incisive is forgetting the bishop and just playing queen takes f5, and we're on our old friend h7 again. And it's like there's no defense here, because if the rook moves, we just mate on there. What does black actually do about h7? There's nothing to do about h7. So that would be the end of the game. Forget about winning the queen. So even stronger than queen takes is just queen takes f5. Yeah, it was. So if we look at this game, it was a very nice attacking game. Something went badly wrong for black. It's hard to put too much blame on one move, like d takes c6. I don't know. This is very tricky stuff. The difference between d takes and bishop takes. The image is actually suggesting d takes is stronger at a certain depth. So maybe the fault lies a little bit later. If we go here, bishop e7, bishop d3, Possibly h6. The engine's suggesting h6 is a better way. If black had played h6, then you can see that the f5, some of the f5 sting is taken out of the equation here. White's slightly better apparently, but it's not like winning or anything. Knight g5 was initially mentioned by the engine. I think black just plays king h8, so bishop c2, now threatening queen d3, c5, if queen d3, g6 now. Seems a bit weird, but apparently this kind of stuff could help defend technically. Apparently this is okay. This is okay for black, this position. So it seems as though if a very subtle defense like h6 is needed, that seems strange. But okay, if we go one move more, b3 c5, bishop b2. I mean, what do we do about f6? That's the problem. What does black do about f6? So that seems like one of the best ideas. Okay, the chance maybe f5 was just needed to be played by black. If black's playing like this, to play f5 here and lose the e6 pawn. I think it was lesser evil time just to lose the e6 pawn. So this was the best continuation for black. On bishop f3, white's even still got attacking intention. So the engine is actually suggesting h5 to lock down on g4. This should be okay, apparently. It's about half a pawn advantage, not much more. Black's king has survived here. But yeah, it was phenomenal in the game that f5 had so much impact the way it was played. So queen h6, and these bishops just coordinating on g7. So queen takes f5 would have been quickly end of game. Right, let's have a look at another one. So this is against Maminova, Nafisa Maminova. So okay, in round 5 we see an English opening. Again, g3 d5. Yeah, it looks a bit dull to start. So black is actually quite greedy here. I think this is theory. Knight takes d4. It's 8s in live book before. So black is a pawn up. And you might think, why? What's the compensation? White's got positional pressure here. After knight fe5. The advantage apparently is for white here in this position. The engine suggests that there's enough compensation. The bishop's the usual sort of problem to have to deal with. Bishop looks good on the diagonal. c-file looks potentially dangerous. Rook c1, and black plays now c5. Bishop d2. So bishop a5 now on the cards. Looks dangerous. Knight d5. e3. Knight b5. Queen e2. So white's content to play this a pawn down. Knight d6, rook fd1, knight takes, knight takes. So again, a pawn down for white, but again the engine is suggesting white has a small advantage here. The rooks are not connected yet, that's one thing to bear in mind. Bishop's still a problem. b5, and now bishop a5 is played. Also apparently e4 was quite good here. If taking bishop c3, what does black do about this? Bishop takes, queen e5. This looks as though it's an advantage for white as well. Either with queen f5 or even just queen takes d5, queen f5, and then just take with the rook after. But no, e4 wasn't played. We see bishop a5, which is good as well. Queen e7, e4 now. Knight goes to b4. That's just taken. And now e5 would be nice, just hitting apparently the rook. Knight e5 was played, but this also looks nice for knight c6. Queen g5. Knight c6. So white is threatening, well, it dominates the position, actually. And black tries now e5. We see h4, queen f6, holding e5 for a moment. b3, and it looks as though, well, this pawn can be taken, for example. a5 protecting it. Rook c2, and now, actually, this pawn is also in danger. That could have been taken, or couldn't the pawn have been taken here? Let's quickly check this out. Queen takes b5. No, we got the problem here for the moment. So rook c2 protects f2, so that queen takes b5 is on the cards. That's the point of that. Bishop b7. Now that's taken. Rook takes, and now white does have great compensation after rook c7 pinning that bishop. With queen e3 on the cards to annoy black. So queen b6 stops queen e3, but now two rooks on the 7th for ample compensation. Huge gigantic pin. Black's FIDE rating is 2321, one of the lower rated in the tournament, by the way. a4 king h2. So white can actually simply play queen e3 soon because of that gigantic pin. This would be pretty good. h6, and in fact queen e3 is played here. Now if black took the queen off, then after f takes, what does black do about b7? If rook b8, I think we just stop mowing the pawns down. Okay, so black played queen a6, but now this leaves c5 for the queen, and there's a very serious threat here for white, which black totally misses. But there's very little to be done about it. If black had recognised the threat that white is having, then rook a8 might have been considered. Sorry, not rook a8 here. I don't think this does anything because rook takes f7. That's a disaster. Rook a8 here is looking like it loses the bishop for not much. No, so in fact, if rook a8 is the engine's suggestion here, you know that there's something wrong with black's position, just losing the bishop for nothing. The reason that, well, black played a8, just losing immediately. Can you guess to what move if I give you 20 seconds in this position? So white to play and win here. Has anyone got an idea? White's play and win. Forcing moves. Even outrageous forcing moves can give tactical insights. So even outrageous forcing moves. Okay, you could treat it like a puzzle as well, I guess. So if this was a puzzle position, what would you play? Yeah, okay, you got to the position now. It's like commenting, that's cool. Yeah, just queen takes f8. Oh, it's end of game. Because if it takes rook d8. So yeah, there was a positional pawn sack in this opening, which seemed to leave black with an uncomfortable game. Even though black has munched two of white's pawns, there's something uncomfortable here. Well, it's now just the d pawn, so one pawn down, but this position has something going for white here. Bishop d2 introduces bishop a5. See, I wonder if knight d5 wasn't played, if something else was played. See this. say that was played. Bishop a5. What would we have here? Entanglement. Quite entanglement. Knight e takes f7. A bit of disaster like that, for example. I'm just running through some ideas. Okay, so there's something quite dangerous about the position here for black. So even here, this stuff. What is it about black's position? I think it's basically these rooks are roaring down the files, and black never got a chance even for this because there was rook d7. Although this might have been one of the better choices, bishop b7. That's actually the engine suggestion. Black didn't play that. This led to a bit more trouble. I think black was getting into big trouble around here. Bishop e6 apparently. Could have kept equality in theory. Bishop e6. The way it was played here, it just started to get a bit worse after, especially bishop b7 here. Rook e8, a little bit better. Just losing b5. This would have still been playable because there's a little tactic on f2 here. Anyway, so it just seemed to get worse for black significantly after bishop b7. We're talking +3 here, from being about equal here. Bishop b7, we're talking more than +3, because white's rooks just dominated now on the 7th rank, and the fight was taken out of black's position totally. Okay, let's have a look at another game. Now against Yushanina, who's been a women's world champion. Let's see what happened there. Anna Yushanina, I think from Ukraine. E4, C5. Anna plays the Sicilian. Now we see bishop b5 with a difference. C4 here. And this looks a little bit strange actually. I wonder what Livebook thinks about it. Third most popular choice. So you can either take most popular, or A4 or C4 third most popular. So it doesn't really matter about, I think, taking here. What's the idea for white? Games could continue a bit like this, and it's okay for white. Alright, so that was ignored. Black played knight f6, knight c3, g6, d4. So white's got some sort of edge at the opening with the Monoxy binds kind of thing going on. So Monoxy bind against d5. Knight takes d4, bishop takes, and now black does take on b5. C takes, not minding about the double pawns. Queen a5, queen d3. About here it's engine stress is about equal. Rook fc8, a3. Now if ever queen takes, I think there's just knight d5. If let's a quick look at that, queen takes, even stronger than knight d5 is actually this. That just wins the queen. Forget that. So the queen went to b3. Queen e2. e6. Rook d3. So that queen's being harassed. Knight d5 surely is on the cards here. Now. Queen c4. Rook ad1. Knight e8. White now plays queen d2, small advantage for white. Exchanges. King h1. Let's see, how does white build up the pressure? Now the queen goes to h6. For the moment, I don't think black has done too much wrong here. It seems okay. f4, queen f6, queen drops back. It looks as though e5 might be quite dangerous, though. Rook c4 is played. Possibly, was there something better against e5? Maybe dropping the queen back in advance of e5 to be able to answer with d5. So e5, d5. This might be an interesting way of playing it. Apparently that's about equal. But here black played rook c4. Now e5 was available here, but it wasn't played. Rook dropped back. queen drop back, queen e3, and again, okay, now there's queen takes a7 here, is on the cards. b6 defending that, a4, queen c7. Now here, f5 might be dangerous, but actually e5 was played. And black didn't play d5. I'm not sure it's too bad if d5. It seems to be quite solid enough. There's nothing majorly wrong here with this for black, it seems. The engine doesn't find any cracks in black's defences here. But black actually played d takes e5. This is slightly more dangerous now after f takes, or in fact what was played, rook d7. This is slightly more dangerous now, rook on the 7th. Queen c5. White took on c5 and took on a7. So what's going on here? Now, if e takes, then, well, that seems as though that could be playable here. Black didn't actually play that. Black played knight f6. And there's a kind of weakness of the last move with that the d6 square has just been uncovered. White has got some advanced pawns over here, so this is a strategically useful move to try and get this pawn going if that pawn can be won. So I think black's made a slight mistake with knight f6. Maybe taking on f4 was safer. Knight e4. Now white does create that dangerous pawn. Knight takes, rook takes. Now rook takes e6 using that pin. Rook takes. We've got these two very dangerous pawns. Rook takes e5, check. Now black tries to attack white a little bit, but the pawn is pushed. And here white is now +3. White has somehow got a massive advantage out of something that black's gone wrong in the last few moves here. This is now a massive advantage. I think the worst of what happened, what was it actually the worst of what happened recently to reach this +3 or +2. Just check this again. This position, yeah, it was starting to be bad after this, especially. Apparently h5 and h4 could try and secure a draw. So this was a drawing method with rook h1. So black missed that opportunity and reaches this position where this b pawn is a menace and there's nothing on g2. So the b pawn's a total menace. H4, f6, and in this position white plays now b7, just letting the rook go because white's going to be queening, and it's with check here after. So if black took this, then taking with check and just queening holds actually the h2 square. So if taking here, white just plays either king h1, or even stronger apparently is just king h3, and that h2 square is held, and that's winning for white. So the rook can't be taken. Rook b2 was played, and now rook b5, so the pawn's still on its way. After rook takes g2, king h3. King h1 is only drawing, so a very accurate move, king h3. This would be a draw with perpetual check, just infinite checks. But king h3 lets the king escape to, over here. Check, and the king's making a run for it. Check, king f3. King's made a run for it. Check, king e4, and here with the pawn queening, black resigned. So some little mistakes there from a position which could have been quite airtight. In particular, after this e5, it seems the engine suggests this is an airtight position with dead equality here with d5. You see that there's no entry point on these entry points mean that the pawns are not going to be queening so easily if these 2 pawns remain on the board. So the way it was played, we have these entry points which are a bit of a pain to losing both these pawns, because if those 2 pawns are lost like in the game, then really we've got a winning B pawn which emerged like in the game. So that's a bit unfortunate. And the king's also resourcefully escaping like James Bond or something. Okay, so the king's escaping via h3. Okay, so oh, actually that was the last game I wanted to show you. That was the last game I lined up. So we've seen here 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I've missed out a win. This is a real pain. Oh, unfortunately. Should we have a look at that next week if there's time? Definitely, I should have had another game. I thought she had won 6. We've gone over 5. But there's plenty of amazing resourcefulness in these games. I think you'll agree. So I hope you enjoyed this week. And okay. Until next week. Okay, so I hope you have good chess, and see you next week. Okay, thanks very much. Comments or questions on YouTube?